Josh, great to see you. Welcome.
Mr. Kessler.
I'm joined by Josh Sutton, Chief Innovation Officer at 66 Degrees. Josh, it'd be great to have you introduce yourself.
Josh Sutton, 66 Degrees, founder of a company called Pandera Systems. Merged that into 66 with you. Lead innovation, and I really think about a couple basic things, like how do I attach people at scale to AI, and how do I measure that in terms of reforming business architecture and organizational design. So that's what I do for 66 Degrees and our customers.
Fantastic. Great to have you here. Josh, you and I had a great conversation a year ago, and 66 Degrees, we're all about building the Agentic Enterprise, helping our customers take that next step forward and build their future business as an Agentic Enterprise. You had built and helped us lay out the blueprint for an Agentic Enterprise to help guide our clients back in 2025. Can you look back over the past year and how did that come to fruition, that blueprint? And if you look at 2026 and as this environment is evolving so quickly, how has that changed? And if you look at the blueprint now, what's new from what you had laid out in 2025?
Yeah, the blueprint was simple, and I think it addressed a couple of key issues. The first was no one really understood what AI transformation really meant. And so the blueprint set out to do one thing, is define it. And so we categorically framed up what transformation meant. And so it materialized a couple things: external-based AI or extra-based AI, AI for decision processing, which we call qualitative and quantitative capabilities, traditional AI and ML for core prediction, which we know is foundational still in just about every part of AI transformation, and then agentic. And agentic really was set in stone to kind of wrap those prior components. And so that blueprint was categorized by vertical, department, function, and person. And so, we understand really how all those things play a role for any particular company, how they fit together to create really the backdrop for what will be business architecture and strategy in the future. And so it was good. One, it gave our customers the ability to know where they were compared to really a reference point. The second thing it gave us almost a health check where we could understand what your initiatives were doing and how they classified into what we would consider a standard transformation model or the blueprint itself. Now, you fast forward now, I think it actually did a couple things for us. It established what we would consider our agentic scaffolding. So those four key parts actually form into an architectural pattern. And that architectural pattern is essentially what we're using to scale up really our new offering around our blueprint, which is our ADF, or our Agent Development Framework. And so that's almost 2.0 of the blueprint. So now that I have the blueprint basis, where do I take it from here? And how do I take that from here to actually realize results? And so I think the new element that we see with the blueprint is really now, how do I actually scale my people? This is a competency issue. We want to make sure that we've got strong AI-based workers. We want to make sure they're really incredibly talented with these platforms to actually drive the business forward. And so, back in 2025, the blueprint was right. It set the framework in motion. Now in 2026, we're looking at the human capital development side, which is how do people think about using AI? How do I put it into practice? How do I do that for 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, 100,000 people? And then how do I actually measure the direct effect of that as it relates to a P&L? And so the blueprint now is able to answer these key questions, and it's predicated on some of the architecture from the original blueprint constructs.
That's fascinating. And is it right to understand then, if I hear you, that the Agentic Enterprise isn't just agents, isn't just an autonomous enterprise? I think as I read a lot about this, and I have a number of clients ask me to say, hey, what does the Agentic Enterprise look like? Could you help me define that as you look out over the blueprint of 2026? What I hear you saying is it's the combination of people, but also really enabling your people.
100%. I think that the Agentic Enterprise is essentially us actually defining what it means to have a hybrid workforce that's actually powered by AI in their thinking and how they manifest their day-to-day process. And so that's built upon the architecture that we put in place 2025 with the original blueprint. So it's a people problem. It's a people opportunity. And I think there's some degree of polarization. And so there's a paradox that's formed around really what is AI-based transformation, what does agentic transformation really mean? What does it really mean to be an agentic enterprise? And a lot of organizations are thinking like, you know what, I'm going to be able to have less people do more, and that's going to drive efficiencies on my SG&A, my P&L. And I think the other part of the paradox is that actually the same amount of people, if we teach them how to think and act, can actually be used to drive efficiencies, but also gain market share, almost win in business in the future. And I think that's actually what I define as kind of the agentic enterprise. It's actually the CEO, the CIO, and the CFO for the first time going, you know what? It's not about less doing more. It's actually about the same amount, being highly competent with these platforms and actually using it to actually win in business in terms of growth, plus efficiencies. And so to me, the agentic enterprise is a hybrid workforce. So it's a combination of having agentics that essentially extend human function. And we've got a method and protocol for what that should look like for people at a team, at a department, at an org unit, and at a macro level. And so it's actually the balance of human plus agents on a scaled basis, orchestrating and driving towards business strategy and executing business efficiently.
Your vision is really clear, is that an agentic enterprise is how can we do with the same level of resources or some additional resources, how can we actually do more and have people plus agents and plus IPI. What I always love to think about is that a traditional services business or a traditional business is capped by its people, it's capped by its person hours. And then oftentimes a traditional software business is capped by its lines of code. I think if we can actually combine both, for ourselves, but also for our clients, the possibilities are endless.
And a really strong, competent resource that's strategic thinking with AI, it actually redefines the boundaries of what we know as roles and responsibilities. And actually changing roles and responsibilities changes org design. What we're seeing now, based on what you're just saying, what we're seeing happening real time is that engineers are being product managers, and they're actually strategizing product feature, product market fit relative to feature function if you're a software company. And we even have product owners actually building code and features and shipping it as an engineer. And so the agentic enterprise to me is, one, really powering people to perform in a way that they couldn't before. It's not, I would say, limitless, but I would just say that it does change the boundaries by which we act in a job. And I think that actually creates a tremendous opportunity to rethink what we do, who does what, how fast we can do it, and the generalized purpose for it. Because if I do all that right, I'm going to actually grow my business. And if I can, as a CEO, if I can get all my team members functioning in this capacity, we can actually re-optimize the org structure and organizational design, roles and responsibility design to actually change the fabric of my architecture and my business, changing my business model, changing my operating model, and actually using AI to do that at an unprecedented pace. And we think that that's the winner in 2026 and beyond, is the C-suite that looks at, this is not just something for efficiencies. This is how I'm going to win in the future, five years, 10 years down the road. It's by attaching people and AI, creating a symbiotic relationship, teaching them how to actually think with it, and then innovating at an unprecedented pace.
That's great. It's great. So, Josh, let's just say that I'm a client CEO or CIO or COO, and you're sitting down with me. And what I really want to double click into is, or find out, is what have you learned, and what gaps have presented themselves in the market, and what offerings has 66 Degrees been able to develop under your oversight to actually help fill those gaps?
I would say that the biggest gap that exists right now is the ability to, on a scaled basis, look at my entire workforce and retool it. It's not a light switch. And so it's actually complicated. So there's all types of, how we operated the business yesterday, kind of merging with how we're going to operate it in the future and what teams do. And I think that creates complexities. Then I'm also introducing technology that's foreign. AI in and of itself doesn't really have a very specific interface. It's all, its predicate is this prompting structure. And so by virtue of its design, its fallacy is that AI assumes that I know the right answers or the right questions to ask through a prompting structure. And so if you kind of put all that into a pot, it's complicated. So I'm trying to change the way we used to do it into the way we do it now, and the technology is relatively new and without pattern. And so A couple things. We have to address the foundational technology. And so we've got one core offering. Our agent development framework addresses foundational infrastructure. We call it our agentic scaffolding. It's how does technology scale around a modern workforce using AI at scale? And can I keep it safe? Is it certifiable? Does it follow ethics? Does it have generalized AI policies? And does it tie to my data assets, all my ecosystem, my enterprise transactional system the right way? It's a technology problem.
So it's an architecture of agents.
It's an architecture of humans and agents with inside of enterprise systems. And so we've defined an architectural pattern for that with inside of ADF. And that addresses, all the intricacies of how do I wire this into my enterprise on a scaled basis. There's not really a pattern for it. And so we've had to define the pattern. And with success, we've refined that pattern with some of our large global businesses. The second thing is, how do I effectively train and educate people how to be effective with AI on a very basis level? How I use it, do I use it often? And then am I actually using it in some way that's relative to my job function? And so we have literacy and fluency strategies that look at teams, departments, and then best practices around how to actually use AI in that specific function, and then how do I evolve that over time? And we apply that inside of an organization. We top that as a top-down strategy, and then we work bottom-up with teams so they learn how to do this at the same level. The third part of that is that when we do have disparity in terms of skills, and we're going to see that significantly in 26 and 27, is that some people are really, really good at it and some people are not. We create this construct where I can actually normalize education with AI by using no-code agents to mid-code agents and allowing some of the really skilled teams to build agents, make them available to some of the less skilled teams, thereby normalizing skills. Meaning the people that are less skilled with AI can now work with an agent that someone else built, and it's now we're all operating at the same level. And so the third part of that is measurement. And if you don't have measurement, it's a rumor. And so we've got to be able to measure the effectiveness of the cost of the token as it's related to the job and function. And so we typically employ the scaffolding, the technology play, the literacy, training, and education relative department function and role. And I think the third prong of that is tokenomics, which is kind of this measurement system of the effective use on a scaled basis. And so when we ramp an organization with these kind of three prongs, we're measuring it and guiding it to be driving towards efficiencies and then innovation.
So it sounds like if I'm a CEO coming to speak with you and asking for advice about how do I retool my organization into an agentic enterprise, what's very important is ADF. So an architecture, and it's not just a technology architecture, it's actually a business architecture. That's right. Of how is my business operating with people and with agents moving forward. And that flows through to customer journeys, that flows to business processes. How am I driving value and serving my customers as people and agents? Number two is, how am I training my people? The technology is there. The technology is moving very rapidly, but how am I training my leadership team? How am I training my engineers? How am I training my frontline workers? And then the third piece is, how am I tracking this? How am I analyzing this usage? How am I tracking this? How am I putting this in my P&L? Josh, you and I talk about this all the time, but advise me if I'm a CEO looking at this for the first time, and I'm a little bit petrified of saying, gosh, this is a lot where do I start?
I think you start with, to us, we've actually created a recipe around those three key components that are, the building blocks of transformation with AI and building the agentic enterprise. And so the formula starts with, training and education and fluency, which is at the ground floor, teaching people how to use it and not be petrified by usage of it, but also teaching and educating on the financial side. What's the financial engineering strategy relative to the measurement system? And on the IT side, we have a formula for that ADF architecture, that agentic architecture that implies this construct called modularity. And so what we're able to do is deploy that to IT and with the CIO in a sense that allows us to have something that persists over time, so that as technology changes, parts and pieces simply just reassemble without having to change the prior two categories. And so our recipe is looking at that in a 12-week period. We address the core agentic scaffolding and the technology infrastructure for the CIO. We have a technology blueprint for them relative to modular architecture with agentic. Mm-hmm. We've got a change management and strategy relative to training and educating and understanding how to benchmark AI-based skills And then we create game plans individualized for departments and teams and functions to kind of rethink and retool the workforce. And then the measurement system we leave with the CIO, the CEO, and the CFO to really calibrate how that's effective at driving towards those strategies. So I think having a recipe is super important. Understanding how these pieces fit together and what sequence you go in, also very important. And I think we've made it very, very simple in those 3 basic building blocks turned into a 12-week initiative. We coin it as our ADF kit. And so once the kit takes place, what we've done is you'll start to see an improvement in what we call AFT. And so the first measure that we teach the executive team is like, how often are people using AI throughout the day? The second measure that we teach around is, am I using it relative to my job and function in terms of competency relative to activity? And so when there's a variation between someone using it effective and maybe ineffective, we're able to supply some sort of training and education to close that gap. And so if we create these tools in this kit, it's a way to actually deploy it quickly, educate rapidly, and then actually from a measurement perspective, be very proactive on how to close the skills gap. And that's what we need, the rigor over a quarter or 2 after we're done with our initial implementation. Someone can actually change the numbers themselves. And so we teach all the tools, we give all the frameworks as part of our approach. That recipe is necessary. It can't be the wild, wild west. And what happens is there's a lot of disparity with what it means to transform or build the agentic enterprise. We've formulated it into those 3 building blocks, and we deploy it in a linear plan, and it's actually measurable. Then it makes it real.
What it sounds like is you leave a CEO and a CIO with a playbook. When you're done, I mean, you help them implement the initial steps, the architecture, the initial change management, and then the tracking and the financial aspect of this. But then you leave them with a playbook, and look, having played football for a number of years, much of my entire life, is that sometimes you change that playbook, and I got to believe that you help from a technology and a business process standpoint, but you give me the pieces to adjust that playbook and help build my business coming out of that.
That's exactly right. The playbook leads to the end game. And instead of us defining what AI-based transformation is, like we did in 2025, we've actually defined in 2026 and onward, what's the end game? What are we driving towards with this transformation? And then that playbook allows us to go from the core infrastructure, data, technology, agentic, up through multi-agent architectures, through bottom-up literacy, fluency training, rethinking the workforce, to then strategic initiatives, rationalization of the technology estate, the computing estate, SaaS tools. And what's happening in our playbook, Ben, is that once I teach people how to be really effective inside of their role, job, function within a department and an organizational unit, it's actually causing the next part of that playbook to what technologies do I actually need or do I not need?
Sure.
In terms of rationalization of tools. And so we're not just focusing with the playbook on giving it to someone, but we're actually creating the perspective for them as we leave on what's the game plan to get to that end game for organizational redesign, roles and responsibility redesign, and then almost the technology estate within inside of my ecosystem that powers my business. How does that need to change? And how can I gain efficiencies there? It's not always going to be on the labor efficiency side. If you do this right, it'll actually self-rationalize the tools that people need to be effective in their job. So AI can actually reduce the tools by being more effective with people.
I'm a firm believer that great technology service providers walk with people as they're transforming their business. And I think what you've just defined is, hey, this is how we at 66 Degrees are walking with the C-suite at each one of our clients as they transform their business. Let me shift this a little bit to our business. So we've introduced a concept called global agentic teams of how we're delivering these solutions, because as we're helping our clients become agentic enterprises, we have to change ourselves as well to keep pace with competition and stay ahead of competition. Could you tell me a little bit about what's changed at 66 Degrees and how we're delivering for our clients?
Yeah, I think our delivery formulary embodies the philosophy of the agentic enterprise, meaning as an employee, I work with a series of agents that help me achieve more, do it faster, and do it with lower risk and higher quality of work. And so that kind of traverses our practices. And so our agentic teams typically are made up of a physical skilled resource plus AI-based resources, that whether they're AI-based applications or whether they're a series of agents that work alongside of them. So as an example, we might have data engineering agents that work alongside of data engineers to actually, if we have to move the plumbing of an entire legacy system that may be on-prem or in some other cloud provider, we actually can team with AI to get that done at an unprecedented pace, so that we can actually focus on what a customer actually wants to do with that data once we relocate it. And so agentic teams come for us as a formula. It's part of our formula for delivery. We live it and breathe it. It's inside of all of our tooling. It's inside how we operate. It's inside of how our operations runs. And actually we deliver with it. And so agentic teams to us, as we've figured out how to attach AI to our smart employees, to provide greater services for our customers. We've actually figured out how to attach it to those that run the business to help us provide better services at a different cost and be optimal for a healthy business.
That's fascinating. So, give me. Would love to wrap with this. Give me an outlook a few years from now. What does an agentic enterprise look for our customers, and then what does an agentic enterprise look like for 66 Degrees?
Yeah, I think there's a couple interesting things that'll happen. There's a very there's a market obsession with agents. And the very first thing that I believe that will happen over the next 12 to 24 months is agents actually are designed to fulfill a particular task or function. And so think of it almost like a skill. So an agent has a particular skill, and it's a hyper focus on that skill. And so agents will stop to exist, actually. So the agents will actually become somewhat of a skills grouping. So let's just call it a cohort of expertise. And so the long and the short of that answer is, like, agents will become skills, and then skills get collected into a cohort that becomes truly like an AI identity. And that AI identity can be a complete peer worker or a role, instead of it performing a specific task or function. And so I think that actual evolution is going to happen incredibly fast. And so many agents will create cohorts of groupings of skills. Those become really a single avatar, if you want to call it that, or single AI identity that actually performs work. And so the evolution for us as 66 workers is, as we build agents to do complex tasks, the combination of many of these agents actually become a peer worker, a data engineer that's capable of fulfilling a broad range of functions alongside of me. So in a 24-month period, I think we're going to see that evolution happen very quickly. We're already seeing it at 66, and our teams are not just building agents by function, they're actually building agents to become many agents that become a particular role. And I think the same thing will happen on the business side with our customers. As they start to create effective agents and they start harvesting innovation from their teams being incredibly talented with AI, they're going to find that these things can potentially become peer workers. And so the peer worker model, I think, will persist for a very long time. I don't think the peer worker replaces the worker, but there'll be an expansive scale. And so for someone like 66, a company of 700 or so employees, we can deliver like we're 100,000 employees, because we have this scaling factor of strategic thinking manifesting through this kind of agent architecture that become skill groups that become peer workers. And so the same philosophy will happen in the four walls of our enterprise, whether it's a supply chain resource or a merchandiser. These are the things that these individualized agent plays, these multi-agent architectures, flow into these single agents that actually become the role itself. And so I think our ADF strategy starts to build that as in 2026, the extension of our business blueprint. And I think that's kind of a foreshadowing to what the blueprint looks like in 2027.
And it's very clear. It's the architecture building blocks, from single agents to groups or systems of agents, the people enablement, the change enablement, the AI enablement building blocks to actually help enable people, and then the financial aspect, because as capital markets have a huge influence on businesses, is that we have to figure out how to report on this to actually drive our business. So Josh, it's always great sitting down with you. Really appreciate your time today.
Good to see you, Ben.
So,